Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Post PhD Directions. And today I have Angela Priest with me, my wonderful co-founder of Alma.me. And we do these chats somewhat regular, really focusing on one topic. And in these chats, I really leverage Angela's 20 years of hiring experience. She has a wealth of experience, and we just need to share with the world what's in her head. And today we're actually going to talk about a topic that is probably relevant for most PhDs, not even only PhDs, I would assume, probably a lot of people in general. And it's all about self-limiting beliefs. And Angela actually came up with the topic. I would just jump right in and ask you, why do you think it's a relevant topic? What are your observations around PhDs, postdocs, or even mid-career academics who make the transition in terms of self-limiting beliefs?
Yeah. So I think one of my big observations overall is that one of the things folks making this transition really struggle with is, what jobs do I apply for? And if you've never been in an organization, that can be really difficult. And breaking out of the deep level of specialization that you have as a PhD to understand the types of jobs that are actually available to you in the market can be very difficult for me sometimes to even identify based on that deep level of specialization. And one of the things that's really that I kind of see happen over and over again is this idea that certain things must be true in order for you to be employable. And so there's a couple of things that I think are really important for people to understand. First off, the job description is not a rubric. That I can't underscore that enough. The job description isn't a rubric. Often the way that the job description gets created is it's either a standardized job description within the organization. It is a Google search where you look for other job positions that are similar and you formulate it off of that. Or now in the days of generative AI, you go into ChatGPT and you ask it to produce a job description, and then you spend a few minutes kind of tailoring it for your specific needs in your organization. So that's why when you look at the body of job descriptions for certain roles, you'll see certain commonalities that happen across those job descriptions. Because in general, while roles will have a variation of titles, there are a finite number of ways that you can describe that particular job. But one of the things that I've noticed PhDs in particular tend to do is they tend to try and make certain assumptions about the hidden criteria for the job. So it's these things that are unstated, where it's almost like taking the job description and taking a very literal interpretation of the job description. Not surprising, because all of you guys are scientists and all of that.
Exactly.
What were you going to say?
No, exactly. I mean, I'm just thinking is exactly what I was thinking. I think this is, where it originates from, because the way we think and the way we read is things are, whatever is written is like the truth in that sense. So if I don't match it, I might not be a fit. But I think, just coming back to one point, I think it's valuable to get the insight on how these descriptions are created, because this helps us to understand. It's not like a research paper. It's just something you do on the go while you have a coffee.
Right. And it is, because we're very busy. The hiring process is extremely disruptive to our day. And most hiring managers are doing, we call it a side of the desk job. It's a job that you do when you have time, because if you're hiring, it's because you have more work than you have people already. So the job description is really there as a guideline tool. It's not a rubric. It's not a rule book. It is not a checklist where we go through and we say, check every single criteria. It's a guideline that we follow. And that tool helps us to say to our internal recruiters and talent acquisition teams, this is generally the profile of somebody that I'm looking for. It rarely, if ever, is exact. And so what we're looking for is we're looking for certain transferable skills. We're looking for how do those skill sets translate into our environment, which you can do in your resume. And there's ways that you can do that to make you kind of further aligned. But One of the things that I really see a lot of PhDs doing is taking this very, very literal interpretation of the job description. And so certain things like when you look at the qualifications, oftentimes the way that we frame those up, those are minimum qualifications. And one of the big questions I get asked is how many of the qualifications do I have to meet to apply? Almost every time I give the answer, there's this look of shock and surprise on it because it's actually lower than you think. It's like 50 to 60% of the qualifications. If you meet 50 to 60% of the qualifications, you're going to show up better than most candidates who are applying. A lot of times when we're getting applications, we get applications from people who are wildly unqualified for the role. And like I said, there's no perfect candidate. That doesn't exist. There's no such thing. We should do a separate episode on some of the challenges and what's going on in hiring right now and why hiring cycles are taking so long. But in general, we're only looking for you to meet 50. If you meet 50%, you're good. Well, that's acceptable. But this literalist perception kind of limits PhDs in a way that it doesn't necessarily limit other job seekers who may have an understanding of the market. So, for example, when a job description says a bachelor's degree is required, it's not saying you can only have a bachelor's degree, but that's oftentimes how it gets interpreted. So, with the way that we think about advanced degrees in industry, whether that's a graduate degree, whether that's a PhD, oftentimes you'll have the bachelor's degree, and that is like zero industry experience. And you might have the graduate degree, which is, degree plus 2 to 3 years of industry experience. And then you have the PhD that is, and again, these are general guidelines. So these are not hard and fast rules, but just to give people a sense of what this means. If you come in and you say, oh, that's an interesting job, and I meet a lot of the criteria, and it sounds interesting to me. A PhD generally counts for 5 to 7 years of industry experience. There's a general understanding that when you have your PhD, you have some level of applied experience because of your thesis. Most people know about the thesis project. And so one of the ways in which I see PhDs limiting themselves is based on their degree. So if all of the things in here aren't specifically related to my specific specialization, that I'm not going to apply. If all of the things in here aren't specifically related to my degree, then I'm not going to apply. And because of that, what that means is that they're kind of looking for a needle in a haystack, which when you're dealing with a market like we have currently, or we call it an employer's market, where there are a lot of jobs, but there's also a lot of candidates out there, employers kind of have their pick. So you kind of have to balance between focusing on a role that aligns with kind of your vertical expertise. So when I say vertical expertise, it's, your thesis specialization is like the 100-foot level. When you go up a couple of levels to the subject matter. So for example, instead of saying, I do research on this specific gene for this specific disease profile, you want to look at what area is that category of disease in. Is your primary research in biology overall as a topic? Are you looking at it's not at kind of the disease factor level is what I'm saying. So you want to take it up a few levels because that will give you access to more jobs that you are qualified to apply for. And so that's what I mean with the self-limiting behaviors. We don't in industry treat the job description as black and white. And so PhDs shouldn't do that either because it's going to create a situation where you're not going to have enough jobs to apply for.
I think it's a very important conversation to have because no one ever tells us. So for us, we really treat it very much as black and white. These are the criteria as one needs to meet. I would also like to highlight, because we have talked about this before, when you think about you meet only 50 to 60% of the criteria, but the reality is if you meet 100%, you're probably already overqualified for the role, because when you think about, and you can probably explain this much better than I do, but if you match all the criteria, you're basically up for a promotion very, very soon, because that means there is no room for you to grow into the role, right? So it's maybe not necessarily a bad thing not to have 100%, because then maybe you might want to look out for something else. Can you comment on that quickly?
So one of the biases I've been talking as we start this year, I've been talking to a lot of hiring managers because I want to kind of get an understanding of what's changed. So I'm talking a lot to my former colleagues and people in my network about what's happening in their spaces. And one of the things that now and before has come up, and this came up when I was hiring PhDs myself and other companies that I've been in or interviewing them as part of the interviewing process, that there's sometimes a concern that when somebody is highly qualified for the role, that they're going to get bored in the role. The reason why that's problematic for us is I mentioned earlier in this conversation that the hiring process is really, really disruptive. Nobody likes the hiring process. It's not a good experience for anyone. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of energy. It takes us away from the things that we need to be doing. So when you have a candidate that meets 100% of the criteria, there's some problems with that. First off, you're concerned that they're going to get bored, that they're going to come into the role and there's nothing that they can learn. So that creates a situation where one of two things has to happen. Either you have to promote them into a new role or they leave the company and I have to start the hiring process all over again. And so when we talk about being overqualified for the position, oftentimes that's why you don't hire somebody who's overqualified for the position. Somebody who meets 100% of the requirements is generally going to be somebody who's overqualified because there's no room for them to grow if they already know how to do everything that role requires. And most people, when they're in the hiring process, outside of kind of this current economic state, but if we look at kind of over time in general, when people leave companies, they're leaving because they want to go to the next level. They want to go and they want to learn something. They want to progress their careers. And so we're looking for those people who we can bring in who have high ceilings, meaning they have a lot of growth trajectory. There's a lot they can bring into our business and come in at a level where we can get them in, we can establish some commitment, we can establish a relationship between that employee and the company, and hopefully create a situation where they want to stay for the long term. Because that's really, really critically important to growth, innovation, et cetera. Whenever you have, we call it employee churn, you lose knowledge in the organization. So you can lose anywhere from 50 to 70% of the knowledge that person held about your company, about your products, every time somebody leaves. And so you're looking for people who are going to have longevity, who are going to have commitment, people who are going to be engaged. When you hear about employee engagement, that's what we're talking about, people who are engaged with the role in the company. And you don't tend to get that from candidates who meet 100% of the criteria. Now, in the current kind of situation I mentioned earlier, there are some people who are out there looking for the perfect candidate. I actually think that has more to do with how hiring managers have been trained and some of the cycles we've seen around retirement. Some of the older generations of employees are retiring, and I'm not sure that all of the knowledge transfer happened during that time period. Because you have to remember, most hiring managers are not hiring continuously throughout the year. They're probably hiring one person every few years in mid-sized companies. If it's a really high growth company, they might be hiring 2-3 people, but you're not spending the bulk of your time necessarily doing hiring processes. And it's definitely a skill to be able to identify the right types of candidates. So some of what I think, and this is my personal hypothesis based on my experience helping companies with this problem, is that we're just seeing kind of a generation of hiring managers who are learning how to effectively hire in high risk economic conditions.
Okay, thank you, Angela. So I have one question because and I would love to discuss this because I guess some of our listeners have the same question, because I think, how do you balance, or could you help me understand and comment a little bit from your perspective on, as you said, you don't want to hire people in positions where they get bored. So PhDs are usually used to a high level of, they work very independently, they drive things forward, they really, you can literally take them and give them a task and they will do it. So there is often with little supervision. So how would you think does this reflect into positions where you need a bachelor's degree as a basis for the job? So because I would assume if you apply for a position where a bachelor degree is required, you would probably expect that someone comes in with a lower level of independence because this person has, a bachelor degree. So how do you think is the balance between the degree that they ask in the description versus the tasks that come with the actual job. I don't know if I'm making any sense, but I think you know what I mean, right? And I hope anyone else
Yeah.
does.
Yeah, don't worry, I've got you.
Okay.
So I think when you look at the job description, so if all it requires is a bachelor's degree and it's just bachelor's degree and doesn't require any other experience, you are way overqualified for that role. So you want to look for positions where it's bachelor's degree plus a number of years of industry experience, because again, your PhD is considered applied experience. So when I say the reason why we ask for a certain number of years of industry experience is twofold. One, if you are in a position where you have to get somebody in quickly who can hit the ground running, you don't want to have a situation where you're having to train somebody as a professional. Generally, that comes after 2 to 3 years of career experience. The other reason is really related to kind of what I just mentioned. So, A, you don't want to have to spend time training somebody to be a professional and how to navigate an organization. Two, you want people to come in who can actually apply their skills on day one, who you don't have to train on certain types of skills. And those skills are really transferable skills. We talk a lot about transferable skills in terms of the soft skills, but there's also hard skills that are part of the transferable skill set as well. For example, if you can write a grant proposal, you can write a sales proposal. If you can write a journal article, you can write a white paper. Right. So that's what I'm talking about with transferable skills. If you study proteins in a particular environment in the body, you probably have some ability to study those proteins in other parts of the body. You've showed me that you can learn how to do that through the course of your PhD. Right. And so as you think about, and I'm not a scientist, so I'm not going to go into super detail there. You could probably talk about that more than I can, Elena. But the point is that certain technical skills are translated to different types of research. So one of the things I'll see across a lot of job descriptions in certain research spaces is like microscopy, and how you use that might be different for different types of research. But the transferable skills is your ability to use microscopy to kind of solve problems, right? So those are all tools that you have in your toolbox. And so, when you're thinking about, bachelor's degree versus PhD, one of the things to really understand is that in industry, we don't care where you got your experience. We really, really don't. In some environments, the PhD actually gives us some indicator that you've got that experience already, because in order to get the degree, you would have had to go through that experience. It's no different than certain types of certifications. I have my project management professional certification, and that doesn't tell them whether I'm going to be a good project manager or not. Whether I'm going to be a good project manager. It just tells them that I have a certain number of hours of experience. I'm likely to have encountered certain problems as I've done certain things in my career. Similar with a PhD. If you've got your PhD, you are likely to have encountered certain things, certain kind of foundational fundamentals through the course of that experience that I'm not going to have to train you. And you're probably going to have a better ability to ask questions and problem solve through as a result because you've got repetitions. But equally valid is somebody who maybe didn't go the PhD route, who went and got their bachelor's degree, got into that position in industry, and formulated their experience that way. So that's more of a vocational style of training that is perfectly acceptable to us as well. So you'll see certain things where it actually is an equivalency. So as a PhD going to industry, you're highly likely to at some point be working with people who don't have a PhD degree who are in a similar position to you. Because again, we recognize these different pathways as valid and as equally valid. Somebody with a bachelor's degree and 7 years of experience can come in and be just as valuable to an organization as somebody coming in with their PhD. They've just gained their experience in different ways. And so we're more interested in those applied skills, applied knowledge, and certain kind of factors up front when we're going through the interview process gives us a reasonable belief that you may have those skills. So you can think of it as, just those points of evidence that lead us to understand in a short period of time whether somebody can come in and on day one do the responsibilities of the role.
But this brings me a follow-up question, and it just popped to my mind that, and I might be completely wrong, so I'm happy there is a commenting function if any of the PhDs listening wants to comment on that. But I feel like when you do a PhD, and the natural next step would be doing a postdoc. So when you come into a postdoc, you're naturally expected to be very independent, from finding your research gap to setting everything up to basically kind of running your own thing. I think the expectations on the level of independence are quite high. And sometimes I could imagine that PhDs apply the same when they look at positions in industry. So what they feel like is, I need to match 100% of the criteria because no one will supervise me. No one will have the time to explain to me how to use database XYZ. And I think this is maybe something where we have a little bit of a knot in our head, because what we think is we need to enter industry and we need to be 100% independent from day one. And I think this is something, it just came to me because I realized this is a little bit how I think. If I applied for a job, I would be like, I want to deliver from day one. So, but it's also, of course, PhDs are highly ambitious people. So it's maybe also a mindset around, I want to be there and I want to just deliver, and recognizing it's okay to only know 50 to 60%. And if I don't know this database that they're using, but I show the willingness to learn, they will teach me. So I think there is a little bit of a disconnect the way we think about industry and what industry actually provides when they employ us. So can you comment a little bit? What is the willingness of when someone takes us in to teach us? Because I think maybe that's a little bit of a thing where we sometimes go wrong.
Yeah, that's actually a really, really insightful comment, Elena. And I think, so there's a couple of things that I want to touch on there. The first thing is that I mentioned engagement, right, a little while ago. And when you have high engagement from your employees, performance tends to skyrocket. There's a direct relationship between the amount of engagement and the performance of the company. And so part of the way that you engage employees is by giving them growth opportunities. And that's a truism no matter where you go, is you're going to have to develop your employees. And every company is different, and specifically what they're looking for is different. However, in your example of the database, I've worked with this database, but perhaps not that one. Well, that shows me that you've got database skills. You probably have understanding of the elements of a database. So you could probably come in and learn. So then it's just a matter of convincing me that you can learn a new database or a new tool that's similar, right? So that's the first thing that I just want to touch on there. But the second thing that I really want to touch on is, being employed by a company is a team sport. And I can't emphasize this enough, if you're a person who wants high degrees of autonomy and full autonomy, an industry job probably isn't going to be for you, because the majority of your time, no matter where you sit in an organization, is going to be spent interacting and engaging with people. That's why the soft skills are so important. We spend anywhere between 50 and 75% of our time collaborating with our teammates in an industry environment. And that's going to be higher or lower. So again, don't take that as gospel. But the point is that it's highly collaborative. And when I'm building a team, one of the things that I can tell you, the factors that I look for, and I know a lot of hiring managers do look for this factor as well, is I want to bring in somebody who isn't identical to everybody else on my team. I want to bring in somebody, I think of my team as a pie, and I want to fill in all of the different slices of the pie, because when you do that, what happens is you bring in somebody who can up-level their teammates because they can share knowledge that they uniquely have, they can share their experience, and then the team can give them something too and up-level them as well. So it's this concept of all boats rise together, where when you have a situation where not everybody is exactly identical, this is why diversity is so important in organizations. It's not necessarily diversity for diversity's sake, but when you have people from diverse backgrounds with diverse worldviews, it creates a situation in which you can solve more problems and where the team can collectively get stronger through the experiences of others. So rather than having to, you mentioned in a postdoc, they've got to go and they've got to learn everything themselves. That takes a really long time. It slows things down. And so from an innovation perspective and from a market competitiveness perspective, if we have to wait for everybody to independently learn everything, we're not going to be competitive in the market. Our products are not going to be as innovative. We're not going to be able to keep up with our competitors. We're likely going to fall behind. And so this idea of the collective knowledge is really, really important. And that's why we also look for soft skills. And that's why we look for your ability to come in and say, I can learn from this person, regardless of their background, regardless of how many degrees, how many accomplishments, how many papers they've published. I can work with this person and I can learn from this person. And that person can also learn from me. And so that kind of idea that you mentioned of having to go it alone, that is a completely foreign concept in business, because that's not how we operate. It's not about the I, it's about the we.
I think is very important. This is something I think a lot of PhDs not struggle with, but it's a bit of a different mindset around. When you do a PhD, you work towards your paper mostly by yourself, right? You do have collaborations, of course, because you cannot know everything. You cannot do every part of the study yourself, but it's mostly you driving it. So I think that's good that we talked about it, because I think that could be something some PhDs have this perception of no one wants to teach me there, or no one will take the time. I have one last question for you, Angela.
Well, before we go up that, I just want to say it's also totally normal to have that perception, and it's not just PhDs who experience it either. When you're coming into industry for the first time, there's a lot of societal pressure to go in and, not say, I don't know. There's a lot of pressure. When you get more mature in your career, and you see this from people who are more mature in their career in the non-academic space, is that you realize it's okay to not know. And it's actually a strength to say what you don't know, because it allows other people in your space and your team to kind of step up to the plate and take responsibility for that. So it's actually a strength to not come in knowing everything. It's actually a strength to go like, here's where I'm really strong, and here's where I can help the team up level, and here's where I think the team can help me grow and up level. So I think that's really important. And I'll give you an example from my own career. There was a point early in my career, as I was starting to get more exposed to the financials of organizations, where I thought I had to be the one to go and do the financial analysis on those things. And so I was doing all of this work to go and learn how to do the financial analysis. And my boss at the time said, what are you doing? Well, I'm learning how to do the financial analysis. And she said, that's why we have finance. And so it was kind of, oh, you mean I can ask them? This is something that I can ask for from this team. And so it's not isolated to PhDs. It's more of what is your level of understanding of this particular type of work environment? And as you acclimate, you start to realize, oh, it's actually a strength that I don't look identical to my teammates.
I love this idea of, being different and thinking of your unique value and what you can add to the team, instead of focusing on what you're actually lacking. And it really brings me to my last question, because now I see a lot of PhDs sitting there thinking, okay, I only meet 50 to 60% of the requirements. How am I going to convince a hiring manager I can learn? Or because they see, okay, you don't have these skills. So what do you think is a good approach of showing that you can get up to speed in a short time, even though you don't have all the skills mentioned in the description?
Yeah, I think one of it is just when we're interviewing you. So this is kind of an interview question. So you have to get past the screen first. One of the ways that you get past the screen when you're thinking about your resume is through repetition and variety. When I'm looking through, I hire for a lot of project managers being in operations. So what I'm looking for is, what is the variety of project management techniques? Again, that higher order skill. The waterfall project management techniques, it is the project management techniques. What are the variety of applications that they've had of that? Are they showing those in the bullet points where they've shown, I've used it to do this, I've used it to do that, I've used it to do this? The other thing that I'm looking for is repetition. How many times have you done it? So when people are looking for longevity in roles and things like that, if you've been in a role for 2 to 3 years, that tells me you've probably had certain repetitions where you've had to do certain things. Now, that's the resume side of it, right? Which is repetition. I also look for career progression. So have you been in progressively responsible roles throughout the course of your work history? So in a PhD, this might look like, well, I was a research assistant during my undergrad program, and then I progressed and I was kind of a graduate research assistant, so in a more advanced program, to a postdoc. So that graduated level of responsibility, that shows me very subtly that you can learn. You don't have to come out and say like, I've learned all of these things. A lot of times that can be a mistake too, that where you talk about learning how to do certain things. That's a very kind of junior level way of describing your experience. But if I look in your resume and I see this progressive level of responsibility as I go through your work history, that tells me that you can learn. It's right there in front of me. Now, when you get into the interviewing environment, what I'm going to be looking to understand is how your thought process works. So how do you work your way through certain problems? How have you done that in the past? Because if you've done it in the past, you're likely to be able to transfer that skill and do it in the future. What are the different types of problems that you've encountered, and how do you describe working through those? So those are some of the types of things that we're looking for. And again, that's on the softer skills side, which I know can throw a lot of PhDs off because they're like, but I have the technical skills. Why isn't that enough? And it's like, because we're about to put you in an environment where it's not 3 or 4 years on one project. It is maybe 3 to 4 months on one project, and then we're moving you to the next one. So that's kind of one of the things that I think is really important, is being able to articulate your thought process for how you work through something or how you did something, not just simply that you did that thing, because that helps us understand if you're a learner. Now, the other aspect is sometimes we'll ask questions in the interview process around, well, you don't have any experience doing this, so how would you go about doing that? That's a similar question. We want to understand your thought process. And so there are situations where they're going to ask you a question about a particular scenario, or in coding positions, they may ask data science positions, or in engineering positions, they might actually ask you to solve a particular problem using your field of expertise. And in an interview environment, you have 5 minutes to answer that maybe, or if you're doing an exercise, you might have 30 minutes to do it. We're not looking for perfection there. We're looking to see what your thought process is and see how you work through problems. So, and I know that can be really frustrating because, again, you all are scientists and you want that level of perfection and rightness. But again, what we're looking for is aptitude. So it's not necessarily, can you do everything 100% in this 5-minute period, but it's how do you work your way through that problem in a particular high pressure environment or a particular way. So that's another way that we test for those things. We might give you kind of a situation like that. In my history, one of the ways that I've tested for it is we give candidates feedback in earlier rounds of the interview process and see if they apply it in later rounds. So there's also a behavioral aspect to this too. And so I think one of the important things there is just to remember that you're being observed at every point. And some of the things that you're being observed on might not be the things that you think, because what we're trying to understand is how you think, how you act, how you behave.
Thank you so much, Angela. To summarize this conversation in one sentence, what I take for me, PhDs, it's okay that you need to learn some things that you don't know already when you apply for a job. And actually, you're not even supposed to know everything. And that's fine too, because we're here to help you get through this. So you're not just being thrown into the swimming pool and you have to learn swim. There is actually also a support system around. So with this being said, Angela, I mean, we could talk forever and ever. Unfortunately, our time has come to an end, but I already am inspired for many more conversations. This was really, really helpful. It's interesting when we have this conversation, I have these little epiphanies. I just got inspired for a post, for a LinkedIn post, because I never thought about it in this way. So it was a great conversation. Angela, thank you for sharing your wisdom. And I'm looking forward to the next episode. And for everyone out there, thank you for listening. If you like this conversation, please leave us a review. And also leave a comment if you agree, disagree. I'm happy to start a discussion. And have a wonderful day, everyone. And see you next week.